Clearwater was a quiet, unassuming town, a place where people left their doors unlocked, where neighbors waved to one another, and where everyone knew each other's name. The kind of town where crime seemed like an abstract concept, something that only happened in big cities far away. Sarah Mitchell was no stranger to this idyllic life. She'd grown up in Clearwater, attended the local high school, and settled in the town after graduating college. At 25, she had found a job she loved at the local bookstore. It was a modest but satisfying life. Every evening, Sarah would walk home after work, her favorite books tucked under her arm, humming a song under her breath as the sun dipped below the horizon. That Wednesday evening in March 2003, however, the sun would set on something much darker than anyone could have imagined. "I'll meet you at the diner after work," Sarah had texted her best friend Emily. They'd made this a weekly tradition, a chance to catch up, laugh about life, share the details of their day. Nothing out of the ordinary. Sarah was looking forward to it, as she always did. But when Sarah didn't show up at the diner that night, Emily assumed something had come up. They'd both been through busy weeks, and maybe Sarah had just gotten caught up in one of her many book projects at the store. But after another hour passed, Emily's unease grew. It wasn't like Sarah to be late, especially without letting her know. Emily tried calling. No answer. She texted again. No reply. A sinking feeling crept into her stomach, and she decided to drive by Sarah's apartment. Her car wasn't there. She called Sarah again, this time with a feeling of dread settling over her like a cold blanket. "I'm sure it's nothing," she reassured herself, but deep down, she knew something was terribly wrong. Welcome to Beneath the Surface, where we uncover the stories that were meant to stay hidden. Lies, betrayals, corruption. Because the truth is never what it seems, until you dare to look beneath the surface. If you're passionate about true crime stories, forgotten victims, and uncovering the dark side of crime, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a case that deserves to be heard. And as you watch, drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what you think. Could there be more to the story? By the time she contacted the authorities, the police had already been alerted. They began a search immediately, but there were no signs of struggle, no notes, and no clues that suggested why Sarah had disappeared. The next day, Sarah's car was found parked in front of her apartment building, locked but empty. Her purse, wallet, and keys were inside, her phone still ringing in the abandoned vehicle. The police had no choice but to file the case as a missing person report. For Sarah's parents, Carol and James Mitchell, this was the beginning of a nightmare. Days turned to weeks and then to months, and still no sign of Sarah. The town of Clearwater had almost forgotten about Sarah. For the Mitchells, however, the absence of their daughter had become an endless ache. Sarah's bedroom stayed exactly as she left it. The bed was made neatly, her shoes still by the door, her books scattered across the desk. Carol and James couldn't bring themselves to change a thing. It had been 3 years, and the case was growing colder by the day. The police had turned up nothing, and without any new evidence, there was little they could do. Sarah had no enemies, no debts, no shady connections. She had been a good daughter, a trusted friend. No one could fathom what had happened to her. Did she run away? Had she been abducted? Or worse, murdered? The town buzzed with speculation, but nothing was concrete. Emily struggled in her own way. She would often drive around the town, looking for anything that could give her an answer. She would walk past the bookstore where Sarah had worked and stand there, staring into the window, willing some clue to appear. Her relationship with her own family had grown strained. She couldn't talk about Sarah without breaking down, but it wasn't just Emily and Sarah's parents who were feeling the loss. The police had all but given up on the case. The file grew thicker with theories, but none of them led anywhere. The town, though still concerned, moved on. New tragedies emerged, and the mysterious case of Sarah Mitchell was buried under layers of other cases that needed attention. It was a hard truth to face, but with no leads and no suspects, Sarah Mitchell became just another name on a list of missing persons, slowly slipping into the forgotten shadows of cold cases. 15 years later, a woman named Megan Turner walked into a police station in Los Angeles, her steps hesitant but deliberate. She was no longer the young woman she had been in 2003. Her face was drawn, her eyes weary, and her fingers trembled as she fidgeted with her sleeve. She had tried for years to bury the guilt she carried, but the weight of it had become unbearable. She had once been a low-level member of a criminal drug ring that spanned multiple states. The group had been involved in the distribution of illegal narcotics, and Megan had been a cog in the wheel. It was a life she had never wanted, but at the time, it was a means to survive. Megan's life had changed drastically in the years following Sarah's disappearance. She had left the drug ring, cut ties with everyone involved, and tried to build a new life. But the guilt never left her. The memories of that night, of the choices she made and the things she turned a blind eye to, haunted her every waking moment. "I need to speak to someone about a missing person case," she said to the receptionist at the police station. Her voice shook as she spoke, but there was no turning back. She couldn't live with the secret anymore. When she finally sat down with Detective James Caldwell, he didn't know what to expect. Megan's story seemed improbable. She claimed she knew what had happened to Sarah Mitchell, a case that had gone unsolved for over a decade. At first, Caldwell thought she might be seeking attention, or worse, just telling a story for the sake of feeling important. But as she spoke, something in her voice told him she wasn't lying. Megan's confession was as shocking as it was detailed. She revealed that in 2003, Sarah Mitchell had unwittingly stumbled into the midst of a major drug operation. Sarah, innocently eavesdropping on a conversation in a local coffee shop, had overheard two men discussing an illegal shipment of drugs that was about to be delivered to a secluded warehouse. "I never meant for it to happen," Megan confessed. But Sarah had heard something she wasn't supposed to hear, and because of that, she became a target. Megan recounted the chilling events of that night. Sarah had been walking home when two men from the drug ring had spotted her, realized what she had overheard, and decided to eliminate the threat. The plan was to silence Sarah before she could expose the operation. Megan admitted she was there when Sarah was taken. She didn't intervene. She was too scared to act, too deeply entrenched in the criminal world to risk her own life by warning Sarah. Megan had been forced to watch as the two men took Sarah, blindfolded her, and drove her out of town to a secluded area where no one would find her. "Why are you telling me this now?" Detective Caldwell asked, his voice calm but filled with suspicion. "Why, after all these years?" Megan's face twisted in guilt. "I couldn't live with it anymore. It's eating me alive. I've tried to forget, but I can't. She didn't deserve that, and I have to make it right." Megan's confession was enough to reignite the investigation into Sarah's case. Detective Caldwell, though skeptical at first, found that Megan's story lined up with certain details that had been previously overlooked. For example, surveillance footage from the night Sarah disappeared showed two men meeting in the parking lot of a gas station, an area Sarah had passed through on her way home. The investigation team, now with a renewed sense of purpose, dug deeper into the drug ring that Megan had been part of. They learned that the operation had been much larger than they initially thought, involving numerous individuals across multiple states. The two men Megan had mentioned were not just low-level criminals. They were key players in a network that had evaded law enforcement for years. One of the men, Adam Larson, was a high-ranking member of the ring, a man with a reputation for being both ruthless and elusive. Larson had been a prime suspect in numerous criminal cases but had managed to stay out of prison. The police had always struggled to pin him down, but with Megan's help, they were able to connect him to Sarah's disappearance. "Where is he now?" Caldwell asked Megan. She shook her head, her eyes brimming with regret. "I don't know, but I can tell you this. He's dangerous. And if you find him, you need to be careful." With the information provided by Megan, the police were able to narrow down their search. They returned to the rural area where Sarah had been taken all those years ago. It took days of digging, but finally they found it. A shallow grave, hidden under the cover of thick trees. When the forensic team arrived, they confirmed the worst possible outcome. The remains found were Sarah Mitchell's. The Mitchell family, after 15 years of agonizing uncertainty, finally had an answer. But it wasn't the answer they'd been hoping for. Sarah was gone, her life taken in a brutal, senseless way, simply because she had unknowingly overheard something she wasn't meant to hear. The investigation into the drug ring continued, and the arrests were swift. Adam Larson was caught and brought to trial, along with several other members of the ring. Megan, though she had played a role in Sarah's death, cooperated fully with the authorities. Her testimony helped dismantle the entire operation. She was placed in a witness protection program, but her actions weighed heavily on her conscience for the rest of her life. For Sarah's family, the pain never truly went away. Sarah's mother, Carol, cried the moment she saw her daughter's remains. She had hoped for so long that Sarah would come home, that the nightmare would end. But it hadn't. The closure they had longed for was bitter, filled with anger and grief. Emily, who had been Sarah's closest friend, attended the trial. The trial didn't bring her peace. It only deepened the emptiness she felt. Sarah had been an innocent victim of a violent, chaotic world that she never asked to be a part of. The truth, while freeing, also exposed the ugliness of the world in which Sarah had lived. In the end, the question remained, what price does one pay for silence? Megan had confessed, but the consequences of her actions were far-reaching, not just for her, but for everyone involved. The day after Sarah went missing, Carol and James Mitchell found themselves in an unrecognizable world. The house that once felt like home was now a prison of grief. The walls felt like they were closing in. Sarah's absence was a constant ache, gnawing at their hearts. Carol sat at the kitchen table staring at the untouched breakfast Sarah had been planning to eat before heading to work. The house felt hollow, as if every space was filled with the invisible weight of uncertainty. Sarah's laughter no longer echoed through the rooms. The little things, the sound of her footsteps, her voice calling from the front door, had all been taken away. And in their place, a deafening silence lingered. "James," Carol said quietly one evening, breaking the long, uncomfortable silence that had settled between them. "What if she's gone forever?" Ames shook his head, his voice thick with emotion. "She's out there, Carol. She has to be." They didn't know what to believe anymore. For a long time, they had refused to accept that their daughter was truly gone. Every time the phone rang, their hearts would leap in hope, only to be dashed again by the voice on the other end of the line. There were no leads, no updates, just silence. Emily was no better off. She had been Sarah's closest friend, and she spent the following weeks retracing the path they would have taken together. She visited every coffee shop, every street corner, searching for a clue, anything that might lead her to her friend. She had heard about the possible sightings of Sarah in neighboring towns, but each one turned out to be a dead end. One afternoon, she found herself standing in the bookstore where Sarah had worked. The manager, a kind woman named Lisa, spoke softly when she saw Emily standing by the door. "Emily," she said gently, "I know you're looking for answers, but you can't keep doing this to yourself." Emily turned to face her, tears welling up in her eyes. "I have to. Sarah's my best friend. She's out there, Lisa. I know it." "I know," Lisa replied with a sad smile, "but you need to stop tormenting yourself. You're not the one who can solve this. Let the police handle it." The words stung, but Emily knew they were true. She couldn't solve the mystery, no matter how hard she tried. The ache of missing Sarah was starting to feel permanent, like a scar that wouldn't fade. Years passed, and with every year, Sarah's case felt more like a distant memory. The media coverage died down. The police reports gathered dust. It wasn't just the police who had moved on, it was the whole town. People would occasionally whisper about Sarah's disappearance, but as the years wore on, they grew tired of hearing about it. The world had moved on, and Sarah Mitchell had become just another unsolved case in a sea of missing persons. Carol and James had a hard time coming to terms with it. They kept Sarah's room as it had been when she left, hoping for a miracle. They would open the door sometimes and just sit there in silence, the overwhelming sense of emptiness filling the air. For them, the pain of not knowing was worse than any finality. Emily, too, struggled to keep the memory of Sarah alive. She had tried to move on, to rebuild her life, but it wasn't the same without her best friend. Every major event in her life felt incomplete. Birthdays, holidays, and even the mundane moments felt empty. She tried to fill the void with work, relationships, and friends, but no one could replace Sarah. Emily's mind kept circling back to the last night she had spoken to Sarah. What had happened? Why hadn't Sarah shown up? Had she been taken by someone? Or had she willingly left? The possibilities swirled in her mind, but none of them made sense. It was like Sarah had disappeared off the face of the earth. At night, Emily would lie in bed and replay their last conversation. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had missed something important. The more she thought about it, the more she wondered. Had Sarah been trying to tell her something? Had she been in danger all along and Emily hadn't seen it? Then, one evening in 2006, Emily received an anonymous letter in the mail. It was postmarked from an unfamiliar city across the country. The letter was short, written in a hurried hand, but it contained just enough information to shock Emily to the core. It read, "Sarah was involved in something dangerous. She knew too much. I'm sorry. There's no turning back now." Emily stared at the letter for a long time. She didn't understand it, but it was clear. Sarah hadn't just disappeared. She had been involved in something dark, something that had cost her life. That was the moment Emily realized the truth. Sarah had been silenced because of something she had stumbled upon. Megan Turner's confession in 2018 hit the investigation like a thunderbolt. After years of uncertainty, her appearance in a Los Angeles police station could not have been more unexpected. Megan had spent the past 15 years trying to forget the horrors of her past, but it was a past she could never outrun. Megan had grown up in Clearwater, just like Sarah. She knew the town, its people, and its dark corners. She had been a part of the drug ring that ran its illegal operations behind the quiet facade of their suburban community. At the time, Megan had been in her early 20s, young, impressionable, and naive. The group she worked with was dangerous, ruthless, and insidious. She had no way of knowing that her connection to them would soon lead to Sarah's tragic fate. In her confession, Megan told the detective everything. She spoke of the drug shipments, the secrecy, the threats, and, most chilling of all, the night Sarah had unknowingly become entangled in their web. Sarah was at the coffee shop sitting at the table next to mine. Megan recalled, her voice shaking. "I wasn't supposed to be there, not with them, but I had no choice. That's when she overheard them talking." Megan's hands trembled as she wrung them together. She didn't know what she had heard, but the men, they knew. She was a liability. The two men Megan referred to were key members of the drug ring. One of them, Adam Larson, had been in charge of handling shipments from out of town. Megan's stomach turned as she recalled the conversation Sarah had overheard. Sarah had heard too much about an upcoming shipment. She had heard the names, the locations, everything they needed to keep hidden. Megan's voice dropped to a whisper. They couldn't let her go. They had to silence her. The detective leaned in, his face hardening. "And you, I didn't stop them," Megan said, choking on her words. "I didn't have the courage. They told me I would be next if I said anything. I couldn't go against them." It was then that the detective understood the gravity of the situation. Megan's involvement in Sarah's disappearance wasn't as simple as being a bystander. She had helped cover up the crime, helping them move Sarah's body to an undisclosed location. Megan's confession wasn't just a plea for redemption. It was an attempt to right a wrong that had haunted her for years. The confession sparked a renewed investigation, and Detective Caldwell and his team went to work with a new sense of urgency. They tracked down leads, searched old crime records, and re-interviewed anyone who had been involved in the original investigation. As they dug deeper into the drug ring's activities, they discovered that it had been far more expansive than anyone had realized. The operation stretched across state lines and had been active for nearly 2 decades. Adam Larson, whom Megan had implicated, was not just a low-level player. He was a major figure in the network. His connections to other criminals and law enforcement made him almost untouchable. But with Megan's help, the team was able to build a case against Larson. They found that he had been involved in countless illegal activities: drug distribution, extortion, money laundering, and even violent assaults. The drug ring had been a well-oiled machine, with Larson at its helm. Megan had given them a critical clue: the location where Sarah's body had been hidden. The investigators used the map that Megan had drawn for them, and after weeks of searching, they pinpointed a remote area just outside Clearwater. "We need to dig there," the lead investigator said one morning, his voice steady. "It's the only place we haven't looked." It was a breakthrough that seemed almost too good to be true. The search for Sarah's body felt like an unending nightmare. The team dug for days, tirelessly sifting through soil and underbrush. The air was heavy with tension, and every person involved in the search knew that this was the moment of truth. When they finally found her, buried in a shallow grave, her body wrapped in plastic, it was as if the earth itself had been holding on to its darkest secret. They immediately notified the Mitchells, who were still struggling with the possibility of Sarah's death. It took only hours for forensic specialists to confirm the identity. Carol and James Mitchell's hearts broke all over again. They had never stopped hoping, never stopped praying that their daughter was alive. But now, they had the cold, undeniable truth. Sarah was gone. For Emily, the discovery of Sarah's body felt like a final, gut-wrenching blow. The world seemed to shift beneath her feet. Sarah had been taken in the cruelest of ways, and no amount of justice could bring her back. The trial of Adam Larson and the other members of the drug ring was a long and painful process. Megan Turner's testimony was crucial in securing the convictions, but it also raised uncomfortable questions about her role in Sarah's death. While she had cooperated with the police, many in the town viewed her as just as guilty as Larson. Megan's sentencing was debated. Some argued that she had been a victim, manipulated by the drug ring, while others felt she deserved to pay for her part in the crime. Ultimately, she was given a reduced sentence in exchange for her cooperation, and she entered witness protection, her identity now hidden for her safety. Sarah's family, despite the trial's conclusion, found no peace. The truth had come out, but it had come at an unimaginable cost. For Carol and James, Sarah would never be truly gone. Her laughter, her presence, her soul, everything about her would live on in their hearts, even though she would never walk through their door again. For Emily, Sarah's death marked the end of an era. She would never forget her best friend, and the pain of her loss would always linger. But she could move forward with the knowledge that justice had been served for. Sarah Mitchell, though lost to the world, had finally found peace. The echo of injustice carries on, unless we choose to speak it out loud. If this story moved you, hit that like button to help more people see it. Subscribe for more deep dives into the crimes they tried to bury, because we're just getting started, and let us know in the comments. What shocked you the most? What would you investigate next? Until next time, keep digging, stay curious, and never stop looking beneath the surface.